everybody, welcome to the config and technical video for Silent Hill 1. Those of you with a keen eye might have noticed that my penumbra logo has changed. It's reflective on the channel too, not just on this background. I was using the original penumbra logo from the game and figured I better change that, so I went ahead and changed it and switched it around a little, just using a font. The font is a Nurati, A-N-U-R-A-T-I. So that's the font I'm using for that. It's free online. You can find it. Just search it in Google. The only thing with it is you have to do everything in capitals. If you do anything in lowercase, they kind of stack on each other and doesn't look right. So the font maker expects you to use caps, and then it will present itself correctly. Let's get our screens open here. And here I'll spell you the name here so you can see it again. A-N-U-R-A-T-I. So that's the name of the font that I'm using there. So you can see how it's spelled if you wanted to search for it. So since this is a PlayStation 1 game being emulated, I'm just showing you my emulation folder here for Duckstation. That's the emulator I'm using. The original one I was using was EPSXE, I think. And it worked fine, but I just recently discovered this emulator and everybody's recommending it, and I have to agree that it does work better and is more simple to use for sure. So that's the emulator that I'm using and would recommend you use for any PS1 game, but definitely for Silent Hill if you'd like to play this yourself. It is called Duckstation. Silly name, but whatever, it works. So there's not going to be much manipulation of this. At some point we'll get into the emulator a little bit so I can show you some configuration screens related to Silent Hill, but there's nothing really to manipulate. I just needed something on the left side here, so there it is. But on the right here is where we'll go through everything that I have to discuss with you. So in this video we'll be setting up Silent Hill 1 general settings and advanced where needed. This will hopefully put the game in the best playable state it can be, ready for the next video where we'll get into the gameplay, the meat of the series. So for configuration, these are all the things that you're going to see as options in Silent Hill when you play it on the PlayStation. I like to go over them generally here and have in a written form that you can pause and come back to and just see written on how to do it. And then I like to end these videos for the configuration and tech by going into the game and showing you these same settings in the game and letting you see visually in the game how it should look, or at least how my settings look if you want to set it up the same way I have. So the first setting you'll encounter is the brightness level. I would suggest starting at level 3. I think it goes to 7 or 8. I forget the maximum. But start at 3. If it's too bright, decrease the number by 1 digit at a time. You may conclude that setting the brightness right away to 0 looks the best for you on your setup. It all depends on how your brightness and contrast is set up on your television, and everybody's going to have things set up differently. But start with 3 and work your way down to 0. Anything brighter than 3 is probably going to be too bright. Then the next option you'll have is controller configurations, and there's 3 types to choose from: a type 1, a type 2, and a type 3. Type 1 is what I'm using, and I believe Silent Hill 2 and 4 utilizes something similar to that, maybe slightly different. But type 1 is what I'm using, and that's the general default for the Silent Hill games. So if you're cool with that, just go ahead and get used to it, and then you won't have any problems in the future games you play. The next section is screen position. Just make sure X and Y equals 0, and then you'll be centered, which it should be by default. Controller vibration. Just pick your preference on that, whether you want vibration or not. I'm not sure on the emulated version on PC through Duckstation if the controller will or will not vibrate. I haven't tested it that far. Just a little bit in the beginning, testing a little bit just to make sure it was going to play right and to confirm with myself the settings are correct before I present them to you. So I haven't gone that far into the game. Once we play it, though, I'll definitely be able to tell you at that point. The next option is auto load. When you start the game, I believe it just auto loads your last hard save, like your last physical save in the game at the notepads that are spread across the game. Those are your save points. I just leave it off myself, but I believe that's what it does. It'll just automatically load your last save. Considering it's emulator, you can quick save and quick load, though, whenever you want to. It's not relating to that. It's relating to physically saving at the notepads. Then the next section is sound. There's no reason why you wouldn't want to keep it on stereo, so leave it on stereo. And then background music and sound effects, just pick your preference on those. In a lot of games, I would tend to leave sound effects at 100% and put background music about 50%. It all depends on how well the game handles and mixes audio, how old or new the game is going to dictate how well that's going to be balanced. But in a lot of older games, a lot of times it's a good idea to put it at 50%, just so music doesn't drown out sound effects or drown out cutscenes. So you just kind of have to experiment with that. Then you can decide how you want to pick it. The last set of options are an extra set of options that are basically hidden. It's a hidden option menu that you can actually access anytime when you're in the normal option menu screen, which I will show you when we go on the game. If you press the L1, L2, R1, or R2, any one of those 4 buttons, it will take you to this extras option screen. I didn't really see any detailed information on Google or even YouTube videos describing these options one by one. I'll do my best, as I don't know 100% myself. So please correct me if I'm wrong or I didn't give enough information in the comments of this video. But I'll do my best to try to go over each one individually instead of just telling you this is what you should set it on and leave it at that. These are all of my settings right here. This is how I have the extras set up. And so we're going to go down here one by one on each one of these. I'm going to try to give you a descriptor so you know what they are. So the first one's weapon control, which the options are press or switch, which is not very clear on what that does. But I've kind of determined by messing with it a little bit as to some things that does. It may do more things. I'm not sure. But press is the default. And if you tap your R2 button, which is your ready your weapon button, like bring your gun up into the shooting position, that's what R2 does. If you tap that, it'll bring up your gun, but then Harry raises the gun and then he lowers it immediately. So if you just tap it once, he'll bring it up and then he'll drop it down. If you put that to switch instead of press, and you tap R2 to bring up your gun, Harry raises the gun and you have to press R2 again for him to lower it. So press is like quickly in position to use the weapon and then not. And then the switch is like a permanent position, kind of like a toggle between not ready and ready. So you can really pick what you want on that. Yeah, basically decide if you want to hold the aim button or not when you shoot the gun. That's really the difference. It has been a while since I've played Silent Hill 1. I'll have to wait in the playthrough until we have at least 2 weapons in our inventory, and then I might mess with that option some more to see if there's any other differences. But in general, that's the main importance of this option, is to decide if you want to hold the aim button to fire or if you just want to toggle it. Because if you have to hold it, then you're using two buttons in combination with each other to do what the other option will let you do with one button, essentially. Then the next option is blood color. The normal is red blood, and then there's green, violet, and black. And a lot of people online have said they like the violet version to give it an even weirder vibe in the game than it already has. And then some people like black. So just pick your preference. It doesn't affect anything. It's just what color blood you want to see. Then view control. Kind of weird feeling to use, but it reverses trying to keep the focus of the camera in front of Harry instead of in the back of him. I keep this on normal instead of reverse. But in my testing, that's essentially what I saw that it was doing that was different. It's just kind of on the focal front of him instead of the back. I prefer to see what's in front of me, not what Harry looks like. So, and then retreat turn, there's a button combination. If you press L1 and L2, or sorry, L1 and R1 together, he does kind of like a spin in place backwards. It's kind of like a quick turn move, basically. I can't really see any difference between normal and reverse. You'd have to let me know in the comments if there is a difference. See if the game is talking about the quick turn that you can do by pressing L1 and R1. I don't see any difference. He still does the maneuver. He doesn't appear to do it any quicker or turn to his left or turn to his right or anything. So, but retreat turn is the only thing I can equate to what is actually a quick turn. And then there's walk and run control. This makes Harry auto-run all the time instead of walking or having to press a button, the run button, to make him run. If you have to hold run button to make him walk, yeah. So if you want to walk instead, you have to hold a button to walk. So it's just the reverse. I suggest leaving it on normal. If you're auto-running all the time, you're going to run into the arms of a nurse, and you don't want that to happen. So I suggest walking and running with a button press if you want to. And then the next one is auto-aiming. I assume whether or not Harry acquires a target automatically when you press R2 to go into shoot mode. So I would suggest leaving that on just to help yourself. If you want to make the game harder so that you have to manually aim, then you can turn that on if you like. The next option that you won't have initially, you'll have everything auto aim and above, they're available automatically, but you have to beat the game at least once to get the last two options, which is a view mode adjustment and a bullet adjust count. So once you beat the game, you'll see these in view mode. This changes the normal view of behind Harry in a third person perspective to a first person view mode. You'll still see Harry's head like in the bottom left corner of your screen regardless, but it's more of a first person view. It's also kind of a jittery view mode. Some will like it and some will probably not like it. It does give you a different perspective on the game. Different perspective on the game, which is cool nonetheless. You should try it out, see what you think of it. And then the last option you'll get is bullet adjust. You still have to beat the game once to get this. This gives you more ammo per pickup. 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. I'm not sure how high the multiplier goes, but you can adjust it to say that every time I pick up a box of bullets, I want 5 times the amount of the original. So the default would probably be just the 1 times. And then the last little thing that you can do that you may or may not know about is if you press L1, R1, L2, R2, and select and start all at the same time, the game will reset you to the title screen of Silent Hill 1. Just make sure you have saved before you do this. Not that useful, but it's there. This may work for other PlayStation 1 games as well. If it does, let me know in the comments, because I don't know. It may just be like a PlayStation 1 game thing where you can just do that in most of them. But it definitely works in Silent Hill 1. And then we get to Duckstation here, the emulator. I have this game digitally, as I said in my introduction video, on my PS3. I paid $4.99 US for it on the PSN digital store. I believe it's not there anymore, so you probably can't even get it. But we'll be covering the emulated version here on PC, as also stated. So these are specific settings I'm using for Silent Hill 1. They probably can carry over to most other PS1 games. Some games have exceptions to the settings you may or may not want to use. I'm not going to be covering all of the Duckstation options. I might do that in another video. Depends on if you guys are interested in that. But let's take a look at the graphic options real quick. I was just going to show you some stills, but I can better manipulate and show you tooltips straight through the emulator. So let me minimize. Let's open it first. I'll minimize here. So this is the emulator, what you're going to see when you start it up. You have a bunch of different screens here that you can, adjust settings in. What we're interested in here is you want to go to settings, and then we're going to be covering a little bit in the display settings and the enhancements settings. But obviously you want to look at all of these other settings and options and set them up accordingly, so you have the best experience in the game. But starting with display here, these are my settings and what I'm using. The renderer, there's a few choices. Software, hardware, OpenGL, Vulkan, DirectX 11, DirectX 12. I'm choosing DirectX 11 just because I feel that's probably the most stable. They actually, you can see down in the bottom there, they recommend you use DirectX 11 from the get-go. But you could probably get away with 12 or Vulkan. Like the order from least to best you would want to go by is software being the worst, OpenGL being the next worst, and then probably 11 being the next worst or the next best as you go higher in the options here, and then 12 being better. Vulkan may be on the same range or slightly better than 12, but if you have any issues in the game that you think the emulator is causing or attributing to, then you want to drop your renderer down, maybe from 11 to OpenGL, probably from 11 to software. But that's all going to be dependent upon your experience, but I would recommend 12 or 11 to be where you start with. And you're probably on software mode, you're not going to benefit from a lot of the options that you have to use if you're on software. So you're going to negate a lot of the effects. And an adapter, just pick what your adapter is. That's what I'm using for my graphics card in my computer. And then pick your resolution. It may only go as high as 1920 by 1080, but that's what I'm using anyway. All of my stuff is running at 1920 by 1080p and 60 FPS or 60 hertz. These settings that are checked really don't matter anyway, because they're grayed out. I think you might have to be on, I don't know what you have to be on. Okay, one of them, the thread rendering, is a software setting. And it seems like no matter what option I do pick, no, there it was. So Vulkan is the threaded presentation. You have to be using Vulkan to use that, or you have to be using software to use this. Since I'm using 11, it grays those out. So they're either on or off automatically. But they don't matter regardless what you put them on, I would say, because they're grayed out. VSync, I use VSync when I can, just because I don't like dealing with screen tearing in my games, and I'm not a speedrunner, so I don't really care too much if there's minimal input lag, which is what most people will complain about. Why they don't use VSync is because it can attribute input lag from your controller, your mouse or keyboard or whatever. It's never been that big a deal to me, and I would rather have input lag than screen tearing. And I have heard that if you have a G-Sync monitor, those monitors have VSync basically already built in. So it doesn't matter whether you use it or not, you're already having it applied to your television, so you probably should just not use it then. But I'm using an old school 1080p television. I don't have a 4K television. My television's only 60 hertz, so, and I know for sure it's not G-Sync, so I always use VSync, either through the game or the emulator, or I force it through my NVIDIA graphics card. The next setting is aspect ratio, auto, game native. I would recommend that. That way you don't inadvertently stretch this game out to widescreen, because if you do, you're going to have unproportionate graphics, because this game was initially designed for a 4:3 aspect ratio, so the auto will keep it at that. Crop only overscan area. So you can see these are the bottom two. They're also a recommended value. I believe this gives you a little bit of a widescreen black bar on the top and the bottom, kind of like you would see in a movie theater, putting it in a widescreen format. So without having this on, the 4:3 is not even going to completely fill from the vertical to the top and bottom of the screen. So put that on auto, or put that on overscan area. Then position center. This is just to make sure the screen's centered. Integer upscaling, it's recommended to uncheck. States it says adds padding to the display area to ensure that the ratio between pixels on the host to pixels in the console is an integer number, may result in a sharper image in some 2D games. So that's something you could experiment with. I'm not using it for this game. Stretch to fill. This will ignore basically the aspect ratio and stretch it, and you don't want stretched images. You want proportioned images. Linear upscaling, recommended be checked. Uses bilinear texture filtering when displaying the console's frame buffer to the screen. Disabling filtering will produce a sharper, blockier, pixelated image. Enabling will smooth out the image. The option will be less noticeable the higher the resolution scale. Yeah, so it's not going to have a huge effect, but it does have an effect, and I would recommend leaving it on. And then the next one's internal resolution screenshots. You can read down there at the bottom. It's if you care or don't care about screenshots you may or may not take. And then the last section is all related to on-screen OSD displays. I don't care to see any of this. I have my own display I use with Riva Tuner through MSI Afterburner, so I don't need this stuff. But if you want to see your FPS or any of these things related to data, then you can check these. So that covers the display section. Next section, enhancements. So here's where you get into some of the really good stuff. Internal resolution scale. They recommend 1x, which is going to give you pretty bad quality. But since I'm aiming for 1080p resolution, which is 5 times what the default would be, obviously you're going to get closer to the resolution you're using than what the game was designed for. But you can go from automatic based on window size, from 1, the default, all the way up to 9 will get you 4K quality, I guess, and then you can go all the way up to 16 times what the internal resolution of the game is set at. But I'm just going for 5 times for 1080p. Setting this beyond 1 times will enhance the resolution of rendered 3D polygons and lines. Only applies to the hardware backends. This option is usually safe, with most games looking fine at higher resolutions. Higher resolutions require more powerful GPU. That is all true, and what it's saying about the only applies to hardware backends, that is referencing the renderer you're using. If you have this set on software, these settings are not going to apply at all anyway. So you have to be on one of the 4 hardware options to have this setting actually benefit you at all. So just pick what you're going for. You're either probably going for 1080p or 4K. Then texture filtering, the recommended is the nearest neighbor. Smooths out the blockiness of magnified textures on 3D objects by using filtering. Will have a greater effect on higher resolution scales, only applies to the hardware renders again. The JIN, C2, and especially times or XBR filtering modes are very demanding and may not be worth the speed penalty. So yeah, the higher you make these, the more they can drag your GPU. I'm just leaving it on this, works fine. I recommend you do that too. Unless you know more than I do, then you can pick the setting you prefer. Downsampling. Downsamples the rendered image prior to displaying it, can improve overall quality, image quality in mixed 2D, 3D games, but should be disabled for pure 3D games. Only applies to the hardware renderers again. So just remember, most all this stuff, these enhancements only apply if you're using a hardware renderer and not something that's on the software side. I would just leave that disabled just like it recommends. True color rendering 24-bit disables dithering. It's recommended to be unchecked. Forces the precision of colors output to the console's frame buffer to use the full 8 bits of precision per channel. This produces nicer looking gradients at the cost of making some colors look slightly different. Disabling the option also enables dithering, which makes the transition between colors less sharp by applying a pattern around those pixels. Most games are compatible with this option, but there is a number which aren't and will have broken effects when enabled. Only applies to the hardware renders again. So some of these settings can make things worse by breaking the graphical effect. It all depends on the game. There's another one, scaled dithering. Scaled dither pattern to resolution. Scales the dithered pattern to the resolution scale of the emulated GPU. This makes the dither pattern much less obvious at higher resolutions. Usually safe to enable and only supported by the hardware renders. So no reason not to use it. Widescreen hack render 3D and display aspect ratio. Scales vertex positions and screen space to a widescreen aspect ratio, essentially increasing the field of view from 4:3 to the chosen display aspect ratio in 3D games. For 2D games or games which use pre-rendered backgrounds, this enhancement will not work as expected, so it may not be compatible with all games. Recommend you leave it unchecked. Software render readbacks run in parallel from video RAM CPU transfers. Runs the software render in parallel for VRAM readbacks. On some systems, this may result in greater performance when using graphical enhancements with the hardware renderer. Just leaving it off. It's up to you. Display enhancements, display interlacing, forces progressive render scans. So this is recommended unchecked, but I decided to check it. Forces the rendering and display of frames to progressive mode. This removes the combining effect seen in 480i games and rendering them in 480p. Usually safe to enable, may not be compatible with all games. It's working fine in this game so far, and it's only going to try to up things to a progressive scan mode, which is better than interlaced. So I would recommend using it, at least trying it. Force NCS timing 60 Hz on PAL, which is European versions of the game. I'm not sure what the given hertz or frame rate would be in the European realm of things. I'm thinking maybe 50 or something like that. Like 50 FPS would be the equivalent to 60 here. I'm not running the PAL version. This is the US version, which you'll probably be running as well, so I would not check this. Force 4.3 for a 24-bit display. Display widescreen for FMVs. Switches back to 4:3 display aspect ratio when displaying 24-bit content, usually FMVs. I would just leave this unchecked. It'll be fine without it. We're not really messing with anything to do with the widescreen anyway that would need to force it back into 4:3, because in the display mode we're following the native aspect ratio here. Chroma smoothing for 24-bit display, reduce FMV color blockiness, smooths out blockiness between color transitions and 24-bit content, usually full motion videos or cutscenes. Only applies to the hardware renderers. I've looked at some of the cutscenes, they looked fine. I don't feel a need to adjust that any, so I left it unchecked. PGXP, Precision Geometry Transform Pipeline. So the first option is Geometry Correction. It's recommended to be unchecked. However, this reduces the wobbly polygons and warping effect textures that are common in PS1 games. Only works in the hardware renderers, which this game definitely suffers from, this wobbliness. If you check this, it'll definitely, which I'm going to be using, it definitely makes that problem not really a problem anymore. So it's really cool that that's there and that they can address that through emulation. So I'd recommend just checking it. Once you have control of Harry in Silent Hill 1, turn this option on and off, and you'll immediately be able to see the difference. You can even see the difference with just him standing there. You don't even have to be moving him to notice it. But I would recommend definitely using it, and definitely using it for this game. And culling correction increases the precision of polygon culling, reducing the number of holes in geometry. Requires geometry correction enabled. So this has to be enabled for this to work, and this will definitely fix things too. Holes in geometry, meaning probably more to do with straight edged lines, textures meeting together at a connection point. You're likely to see a black hole or a black gap where they might not have joined them correctly, or the 3D models aren't behaving with each other. So this will help fix that. Perspective correct textures. Also something that's recommended to be checked. Uses perspective correct interpolation for texture coordinates, straightening out warped textures. Requires geometry correction to be enabled also. So this will basically help this option work better. So I would recommend using it as well. Perspective correct colors, uses perspective correct interpolation for vertex colors, which can improve visuals in some games but cause rendering errors in others. Requires geometry correction enabled, the first one as well. I just assume leave the coloring alone for the most part. So that's why I decided to not use that. Preserve projection precision, adds additional precision to PGXP data post-projection, may improve visuals in some games. I'm just leaving it unchecked. It's recommended not to be checked. Yeah, so depth buffer, low compatibility, attempts to reduce polygon Z fighting by testing pixels against the depth values from PGXP, low compatibility, but can work well in some games. Other games may need a threshold adjustment. Just say leave it unchecked. Then the last thing, CPU mode very slow. Uses PGXP for all instructions, not just memory operations. Required for PGXP to correct wobble in some games, but has a very high performance cost. Unchecked is recommended. So yeah, I would recommend leaving that unchecked too. I didn't see any need to risk having a performance issue just because of it. So these are collectively all of my options. I'll go back to display again here so you can see again if you want to pause or take a screenshot. So this is going to put the gameplay and FMV cutscenes all in a 4:3 perspective. But that's because that is their intended aspect. This emulator does not give you any kind of an ability to correctly display in widescreen without stretching. PlayStation 2 emulator, the one I am using for PlayStation 2 emulation, does in a lot of games. There's an option to download a bunch of, they call them like widescreen cheats or widescreen hacks, but they can legitimately make the game fill the screen completely on a widescreen television and do it proportionately so things are not stretched. But this emulator is not going to do that with PS1 Silent Hill 1. And this is how it would be presented to you if you were playing on the original hardware anyway. You would be playing the game in 4:3 aspect as well as seeing cutscenes in 4:3. So you can change that by, forcing an aspect ratio that's 16:9 or stretch to fill and things like that. But I'm going to present these games the way they look the best and the way they should be presented. If you want to play your games in widescreen like that and distort your image and play it incorrectly, that's up to you. But this will get you correct in most cases, ratio and resolution and everything. And I'll give you the enhancement screen again here too, so you can pause. But in my configuration, what I've read online, looked at in forums, related to, I think these settings I initially started with were directly related to playing Silent Hill 1 through this emulator. But most of this is going to carry over and apply to many other games you're going to play. Because like I said, there's other games that have this wobbly effect in the PS1 graphics. And this geometry correction will make that better. So that's the emulator. So that covers that. Like I said, these are specific settings I'm using for Silent Hill 1. They probably can carry over. Some games will have exceptions. But that should get you in a good starting position to get going with the game. And to end this configuration and technical video, I am going to go into Silent Hill 1, into the options, and we'll look at everything here above that I initially discussed and show you in the game how it looks for me. And hopefully that'll give you a little more insight into these settings. So I'm just going to do a quick cut and edit here, and I'll see you in that next part of this video. Thank you for watching. Bye. Hello everybody. Here we are in the options screen of Silent Hill 1, and you can see here how some of my settings already are set, but we're going to go down one by one, and then I'll take you into the extra options menu, and you can look at that with me. So brightness level, you can see, hopefully you can see, these lines, vertical lines in the background visible. That's basically how you want to adjust this. You can see when I put it all the way up to level 7 how visible they are. Basically just to the point of where you can start to see them, which for me is 3. So I would start at 3 like I've said already, and work your way down to 0. 0 may be bright enough for you. I'm going to keep it at level 3 for now. And here's the controller configuration, and you have your type 1, type 2, type 3, and so this is type 1. Here you can see the change, and then the change on type 3, back to the change on type 2, and then back to the change of type 1. I'm just going to be using level 1. That's the basic default of the game. So just decide which option you want to use there. Screen position, here's the XY. As long as it doesn't look like that, then you're fine. You just want it to be on 0 so everything is centered. Vibration on or off. Auto load, as I said, I believe it just loads the last hard save you've made in the game. I prefer it not to do that immediately, so I'm going to have it off. And then stereo is, or sound is stereo and mono. There's no reason to use mono, so keep it on stereo. And then background sound effects. As I've said before, you may want to lower background music down to the middle. It's totally up to you. I'm going to keep everything maxed. So this covers the general options here for Silent Hill 1. And if you press L1 or L2, or excuse me, if you press R1 or L1 or R2 and L2, either one of those, it will take you to the extra options screen. And the same button will take you back. And here's where you have the extra options. Weapon control, like I said, the difference between the press and the switch, whether you want to have to hold the ready weapon button or not, or if you just want to have to toggle it on or off. And then here's where you can pick the different blood colors, normal being red, and then green, violet, or black. And then view control being normal behind Harry when you press that button, which I think it's L2 button. Might be R1, I'm not sure. Actually, it might be, it's either L2 or L1, I think. So whether you want the camera to be behind him when you do that or like facing him, which I don't know why you'd want to use it that way. And then the retreat turn, I'm still not completely sure on that. But when you press L1 and L2 together, he does a quick turn to face the other direction. But I don't see how this affects any difference between it. And then this basically, whether you want to walk normally and have to hold the button to press run, or reverse would be he runs all the time and you have to press and hold a button to make him walk. So just pick how you want to do that. I would recommend having him walk and you having to hold a button to run. And then auto aiming, whether you press R2 and you bring up the weapon to fire, whether he automatically locks on to the closest enemy or he doesn't and you have to manually aim at something. I would recommend that you just leave it on auto so that he'll acquire whatever target's closest. And that's really all the options in the game, covering the extras as well as the original options. So let me tab out here. And so that covers everything that I really have to go over here for this game and setting it up and configuring it. None of these things I really considered mods, so I'm not making a mod video for this game. Yeah, this game will not require a modding video, so that we'll be getting into the gameplay in the next video. So I appreciate you watching and checking out this video, and I hope it was helpful to you. And we'll see you in the next video where we start the first part of the gameplay series for Silent Hill 1. So thank you again for watching. Bye.